the 26th Annual Greater Philadelphia Martin Luther King Day of Service. Thank you to all of us who are here, including our Mayor Kenny, Attorney General Shapiro, District Attorney Krasner, our board, my board chair, Board of City Trust, Bernie Smalley, Dr. Stanford, our friends and colleagues at Blue Cross, Children's Hospital, Johnson & Johnson, and United Way, and all who are participating in the King Day throughout the city. The Girard community is proud to partner with Global Citizen for 12 years as the signature site for the MLK Day of Service. And I cannot think of a more timely or critical act of service than the COVID testing taking place here on our campus today. Groups like Black Doctors Consortium have jumped in to meet a need for those people fighting for a more just and equitable healthcare economy under extremely challenging circumstances. Here at Girard, we work with vulnerable students and families every day and have seen firsthand how COVID has magnified the challenges already faced by people of color and those impacted by poverty. Racial and social injustice is its own disease, and there is no vaccine for that. I'm grateful that our students are still able to participate in King Day this year by expressing their artwork on the space pads you see in front of you, as well as expressing themselves through a virtual music and poetry compilation. By partnering with organizations like Mural Arts and Global Citizen, they see what it means to fight justice in this world. Dr. King's legacy will always resonate strongly here in Philadelphia and at Girard College. As he said, every step towards the goal of justice requires the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Our school has been an institution of social change since its founding, and we continue to provide the tools and resources that our students need to live lives of impact, to fight for justice and inequity in their communities. Thank you again to everyone who's worked to make this day possible. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the president of Global Citizen and the director of the King Day of Service, Mr. Todd Burns.
Good morning, everyone. Try not to knock over the podium. Heather Waddington, thank you for hosting us now for 12 years. It's sort of hard to believe, but I can't think of a better place to be than Girard College. Welcome, everyone, to the 26th Annual Greater Philadelphia Martin Luther King Day of Service. To our sponsors, some of whom are here today, some of whom came in from great distances, like Dr. Theodore from California. And thank you to my staff colleagues who worked so hard to make this day possible. In 1966, Dr. King at a Chicago news conference said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhuman. More than 50 years later, we could say the same thing, given what we've learned throughout this pandemic. This health crisis has taken the lives of just about 400,000 Americans. Our family members, friends, people we love, and those we hear about each day, who've had their own sudden lives cut suddenly short. The health crisis has also woken us to a number of other issues related to the pandemic. And the theme for today, justice in the COVID-19 health crisis, speaks to that. Dr. Stanford, Dr. Ayla Stanford, has been amazing to get to know. I think she really exemplifies what Dr. King did. He saw inequities in our society, and he responded to, he brought people together to turn their concerns into action. So we're delighted, Ayla, to be partnering with you and your colleagues, along with our lead corporate sponsors, Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson, Johnson & Johnson Consumer Health, and the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey. Also in this COVID testing project, We're joined by Independence Blue Cross, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Gateway Health, AmeriHealth Caritas, as well as the health departments from the city of Philadelphia and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In a few minutes from now, the Black Doctors Consortium will be leading us in free drive-through and walk-in COVID testing here on the campus from 9 a.m. to noon. And our focus is really in serving underserved communities. Also in the related issues, we'll be distributing bags of PPE to everyone who comes through, literature on health protocols, the vaccine, and mental health issues, which we've learned are very front and center. We'll also be giving out books to young people to promote early literacy. Thank you to all of the physicians. A number of the frontline healthcare workers are in this room. And we so appreciate what you're doing, not just today, but every day. On other issues related to the pandemic, we have several locations around the city addressing food insecurity by distributing food, meeting the tremendous amount of unemployment. We have a virtual career exploration expo addressing unemployment and economic justice. That is led by the Philadelphia Youth Network, Community College of Philadelphia, and the Urban League of Philadelphia. Later today at 3 o'clock, I invite you all to join us for a virtual conversation on racial justice, disparities in healthcare, and that will be led by Dr. Stanford and Dr. Saeed Ibrahim from the Cornell Medical Center, who's a research scientist on racial disparities. And to address the critical needs for childhood literacy, reading captains will be trained to connect community members on the ground with a citywide movement for early literacy, and that is the Read by Fourth campaign. There will be virtual projects throughout the city, throughout the region. Anyone who is still interested can go to MLK Day of Service to learn more. And I just want to stress, as I know the mayor does every year, and I think we'll hear from the governor in a video, that although we embrace Dr. King's legacy on this day, of social justice and racial justice and equity, it is not good enough to be engaged just on one day. Dr. King was a man of action 365 days a year, and I think for us to solve some of those great pressing community problems, we have to do the same. So thank you all for being here, and I would like to turn the program over to a video from President-elect Joe Biden.
Dr. King once said, "Everyone can be great because everyone can serve." It's one of his many lessons that endures today and that we've seen throughout this pandemic. From sewing masks to dropping off groceries to their elderly neighbors, Americans across the country know that service, looking out for one another, is part of who we are as a nation. And it's why during the inaugural week, my family and I will be joining the National Day of Service on Dr. Martin Luther King Day. On January 18th, 2021, we'll be partnering with organizations across the country to organize service events focused on COVID-19 relief efforts. We hope you can help. Consider what your community needs and reach out to your friends to get them involved. For example, you can collect jackets from your neighbors and drop them off at shelters. Fill a virtual shopping cart for a food pantry, or join virtual events to write cards of thanks to first responders. To find out more, go to bideninaugural.org/service to learn how to get involved and commit to serving your country on Dr. King Day of Service during inaugural week. Service is a fitting way to start to heal, unite, and rebuild this country we love. I hope you can join us. And thank you, and I wish you and your families much love and much hope for the new year.
We thank the President-elect for that message. Healing is certainly something, given the divisions in our nation, it's so important. I'm really thrilled right now to present via Zoom the third ranking member of Congress, the House Majority Whip from South Carolina, Congressman James Clyburn. I don't know if it's his volume.
Hello?
Hello, welcome.
Thank you very much. Let me thank all of you for celebrating this day of service and for the Global Citizens Committee for inviting me to be a part of it. As you just heard from the president-elect for the next 48 hours and what I hope will be the 46th president of the United States, one cannot tell. Things may happen between now and then. That would make him the 47th president of the United States. But let me thank Joe Biden for all that he's meant to this country, to me and my family over the years. You know, on this day of service, you are celebrating the life and legacy of a man who, if he had been allowed to live, would be celebrating his 92nd birthday today. And I think it's fitting and proper that you have as your theme dealing with COVID-19 and the disparities that have been revealed as a result of our country's inadequate preparation to respond to a health situation such as this one. I'm going to thank Dr. Ayla Stanford. I've been watching her over the last several days and thank her for the role that she's playing in getting us the help we need to get beyond this pandemic. I've been working with your Congressman, Dwight Evans, trying to make sure that our response here, especially in my role as chair of the select subcommittee on oversight of this tremendous threat to our security, our safety, and the health of all of our folks going forward. I noticed that one of my favorite quotes from King's healthcare speech back in 1966 has been used as you have listened to the introduction of the program today. Another of my favorite quotes, just used by the president-elect in talking about what service can do for one's greatness. But let me refer you to something else that I do every King Day. I prepare for it by rereading his letter from the Birmingham City Jail. That letter written at a time when this country was at an inflection point, much like it is today. In that letter, which was a response to a letter Dr. King had gotten from a group of ministers, one of whom was from South Carolina. These 8 white ministers wrote him, and in their letter, they explained to him that they thought that the cause that he was championing was a just cause, but they thought that the time was not quite right to deal with it. They said to him in that letter that they thought he ought to leave Birmingham because he was a disruptive force. And in his letter, in response to them, King says, I'm in Birmingham because there is injustice in Birmingham. And he went on to say that famous quote that we all are very proud of repeating: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that is the case with healthcare. That is the case with what we're trying to do in order to make sure that everybody, all communities, come together and work to overcome this pandemic. And so let me I say to you, as I say very often, also from that letter, King wrote that he was coming to the conclusion that the people of ill will in our society are making a much better use of time than the people of goodwill. And he warned us that we were going to be made to repent, not just for the vitriolic words and deeds of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. I'm hopeful that after we've seen what we've seen over the last several days, after we've heard things we've heard over the last several days, as we go about the business of getting beyond this pandemic, the worst in over 100 years, that we will break our silence. We cannot afford to consent to the things we're hearing and seeing by remaining silent. And so on this day of service, congratulations to global citizens for continuing the honor work of late Senator Harris Wofford and the late Congressman John Lewis, and for continuing to honor the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. by having and celebrating this day of service. And I hope for each and every one of you, good luck and Godspeed. Those things he can leave.
As we celebrate the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. again. For the past few years, I've had the privilege of participating in this annual event. With the pandemic still raging across the globe, this is a King Day unlike any other. Because service to others is more important than ever. I'm proud to say that here in the city of Phoenix, volunteerism helped to keep our neighbors fed, children educated, and residents safe. As challenging as 2020 was, it was the generosity of time and talent that inspired so many of us to keep moving forward. You may recall that at Citizens Bank Park, Medical Reserve Corps volunteers were among the first responders who kept the first major testing operation running smoothly. We're deeply indebted to these individuals for all the support they provided. And I commend those of you who are getting trained as an MRC volunteer today. Also want to recognize Dr. Stanford and the Black Doctors COVID Consortium. For their tireless and fearless work in testing and distributing the vaccine within the Black community, our Black community. And I want to say, Dr. Stanford, you're ferocious. Where are you? As you know, this pandemic has amplified deep felt disparities that have existed within our communities of color for far too long. One silver lining of the pandemic is how it showed the world how necessary it is to improve health equity and racial equity. Our administration is more committed than ever to addressing both. And as you also know, Dr. King dedicated his life to. We're seeing this play out firsthand as COVID-19 claims more Black lives than any other racial group, which is truly heartbreaking and is truly unacceptable. But I'm confident that by working together, we can close these gaps. Before I go, I want to acknowledge the time, sacrifices, and dedication of every physician, nurse, frontline worker, and volunteer who is supporting the COVID response. We owe you all much. And one way members of the public can give back and do their part is to help spread the word about the vaccine. As the vaccine becomes more readily available to the general public, we need to educate others about why getting it is important and where and how people can get it. It is important for people to see other trusted and respected figures in their communities safely getting vaccinated. It's the only way we can end this crisis and get our lives back to a new normal. So thank you again for having me here today. Special thanks to Todd Bernstein and the entire Global Citizen team for keeping this event alive and make the necessary modifications to keep people safe. Thank you all for your service and God bless. I just want to say that January or December 31st at 12 midnight, January 1st, 2020 came to an official end. But it's not, but yeah. The problem is Wednesday at 12 o'clock, it will come to an official end. We've seen over the past 4 years, especially over the last year, is really frightening and makes us think about how fragile our democracy actually is and how we need everyone to make sure that this democracy moves forward and becomes what our forefathers wanted it to be and couldn't make it be at the time because they didn't have the courage to do it then. But we need to make sure that we move forward. And what we've seen in the halls of the Congress, and I remember looking for Congressman Evans to make sure he was okay, and calling our other Congress people and Mary Gay and Madeline and making sure they were safe and where were they. And I mean, I would never have anticipated having to call a member of Congress to make sure they were safe in the Capitol. I'm serious, this is real. These people are crazy and they're mean, and we have to make sure that we fight them back. And I think Joe Biden and the stark elevation of Kamala Harris as vice president, I think will move us in the direction we need to move. And we need to embrace each other, respect each other, love each other. And I think that's what Dr. King wanted us to do. So God bless you.
Hi, I'm Governor Tom Wolf. It's an honor to join you to celebrate the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm glad to be with you virtually today to congratulate everyone who helps make the Greater Philadelphia King Day of Service an annual success. Global citizens, community partners, sponsors, and volunteers have made this the largest King Day event in the nation for the past quarter century. Today, we commemorate Dr. King's work in the fight against injustice and inequality and the pursuit of freedom and opportunity for all. The theme for this year, Justice and the COVID-19 health crisis, underscores the unprecedented challenges we face. Dr. King expressed concerns about health equity more than 50 years ago, and we are still working to overcome those inequities today. COVID-19 has disproportionately affected the Black community. So today's King Day of Service is providing free COVID testing, targeting those from underserved communities. Thank you to our frontline healthcare heroes, led today by the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium in partnership with Johnson & Johnson, Independence Blue Cross, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Penn Medicine, the Pennsylvania and Philadelphia Health Departments, and other healthcare providers and advocacy organizations. You are harnessing the resources and human capital necessary to defeat this deadly virus. We must always embrace Dr. King's legacy of social justice, civic engagement, and citizen action, not just on King Day, but every day. When we give back to our communities, everyone benefits. And I cannot think of a more critical time to give back than right now. Thank you for your service as we celebrate Dr. King.
Senator Casey. You're up.
Senator Casey, you're
Yes.
on.
Hey, Todd, thank you very much. I want to thank you, Todd, for your leadership again all these years in leading us in this day of service. I want to thank Global Citizen, of course, all of the sponsors that the governor mentioned. And I want to thank the distinguished elected officials who preceded me as well as Dr. Stanford and the Black Doctors Consortium. I want to say a word initially about Jim Clyburn, who preceded me in this program. I want to thank him for his service, for his leadership over many years, but I especially want to thank him for what he did in this past year during the election. I know we're not allowed to talk much about elections, but it's entirely possible, and we can't prove this, but it's entirely possible that if Jim Clyburn didn't stand up when he did, there would not be a President-elect Biden or a Vice President-elect Harris. That's just my opinion. So for that alone, we want to thank him for his leadership, his courage, and his foresight. And we want to thank him for joining us on this King Day of Service, a day when there's a lot of darkness, a lot of challenges ahead of us, but also a lot of light, and the light that's brought to bear by the service that will be done today by the thousands and thousands of those who will serve today. Now, my day won't be a day of service like I normally have starting out at Girard College, and I want to thank the leadership of Girard College for making this day possible. I'll be at a senior high-rise in Scranton, Pennsylvania, my hometown, and then I have to drive to Washington to get ready for the inauguration and a week of work. But I do want to thank those who are doing service today, who will put in a full day of service. And on this day of service, we're reminded of the challenge of COVID-19, the worst public health crisis in a century, and the economic calamity that came in its wake, as well as we're remembering those who were killed and injured in the attack on the Capitol. But despite all of those challenges, we also have to remember that infused in all of these challenges is the issue of systemic racism, which was, of course, propelled into our national conversation again in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. We have to bring about accountability for those acts of violence as well. And during the pandemic, we know that Black Americans have suffered disproportionately when it comes to the number of cases and deaths. And as the mayor and others have referenced, the pandemic has highlighted other disparities, other injustices because of today's focus on justice itself. The injustices and the inequities with regard to healthcare or education or housing or wages and economic opportunity, and yes, the injustice of an environment that so many communities of color live in because we have not made progress on those issues as well. We've got to come together and get our economy out of the ditch to lift up Americans who have suffered disproportionately from those injustices. But as we consider those challenges, and as we consider the challenges, especially at this time, I want to strike a note of optimism. On the same day, the very same day that our nation suffered an attack on the federal government, fueled by a lie about the election, a falsehood about the election, propagated by the President of the United States, a lie that was soaked in racism. The state of Georgia, and this is the good news, the state of Georgia elected 2 Democrats to the United States Senate, due largely to and driven by, of course, Black men and women in Georgia, and all the work that was done in the previous decade leading up to that election. The election of these 2 Democratic senators means that the balance of power changed in the United States Senate, made it possible for us to have a majority, not because of the 50-50 tie only, but because we have the first Black American to serve as vice president, the first woman, Kamala Harris, who will break that tie. So we have a lot of reasons to be optimistic on this day of service. Despite all the challenges we have, we're going to bring change to America. We're going to do that because so many Black Americans stood up with courage, stood up against the pandemic, stood up against intimidation, and voted to change America. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It's going to be hard, but we're going to bring change to America. And this day of service is a great opening to a new chapter in American history. God bless your service and God bless our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bob Casey. I think part of what faded out was he was talking about Georgia and the election of Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. I want to now introduce another triple threat of speakers. It will be Dr. Stanford, Attorney General Josh Shapiro, and Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner. But I would just again like to say about Dr. Stanford, she clearly took the leadership in identifying the problem and forming this incredible organization. Are equally to be commended for their incredible dedication, working every day. Greg Scott, the operations manager, and others are here. So let's just give them another round of applause. Before Ayla speaks, I want to recognize Representative Malcolm Pinata, who is here over here. He's a great leader at Throughout College and has done so much for this institution. And Commissioner Field from the fire department. And I'm not sure if Madeline Bell is here, but Hospital, Philadelphia, we thank you as well. With that, Dr. Smith.
It's moving with alacrity so you can get out and start testing. Did the people already go out and start? Okay, all right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Day. From Washington. I remember being on his shoulders. I remember people speaking. I remember Rosa Parks. I remember Stevie Wonder singing that song. And so this is all full circle for me. I thank Todd for asking us to participate. And so many of his words resonate with me right now. The fierce urgency of right now with this pandemic. I am so grateful for my entire staff that just in this past week all worked over 75 to 80 hours this week alone. All of we tested a day, we tested a day, we vaccinated a day, we tested a day, we vaccinated a day. They did that. This was our 1 weekend off to get ready for today. And when I said to them, I think we can get vaccine this weekend, will you show up? They all showed up, every single one of them. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Philadelphia, thank you for all those people, over 1,000 that we vaccinated this weekend in North Carolina. When I formed BDCC, it was not about being separate, it was about equity. That is our goal every single day. Last night, I listened to Dr. King's speech on race relations. Everybody has something they listened to the night before, right? And I listened and my sons were like, oh, Mommy, do we have to? Yes, you have. With my husband. And he said, we can pull ourselves up from our own bootstraps. We have the skills, we know how to do it, but not if we're bootless. BDCC works to level a playing field that has never been leveled. We cannot do it alone. And as you heard Mayor Kenny say, we listen and we educate folks about this vaccine. So many people said, Black people don't want it. African Americans don't want it. Latinx doesn't want it. We put a link out on Monday. And in 1 week, over 8,000 people registered to receive the vaccine. Okay, over 8,000. Over 60% of which are African American. And I'll tell you, this weekend, we had a woman come in who said, my mom died last night from COVID. Can I please move up and get a vaccine today? We had a man say, I'm HIV positive. I work in the public, but I can't get off from work. Can I move up my appointment to come in a little bit earlier? We had people with oxygen coming in, 90-year-old folks coming in, folks waiting 2 hours before we started to get in. And so what I would say to that is, I appreciate Todd. I appreciate you all being here and Ken being here today. We've got so many testers. I don't know how many people bring on a test today, but we will test every day to the new administration and to Mayor Kenny. That National Guard that President-elect Biden is talking about, bring him here to help us. Bring him here to help us. We have the people, we have the relationships, people are ready. We just need more people. We have a staff of 70, it's not enough. We need more people. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can support what's already working and what's hitting those communities that no one else can touch, but we seem to have figured it out by going to the people. But collectively, we do it together. We are much more effective than us doing it alone. We are all the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's dream. We are all his dream. Every day that you work towards equity and try to overturn injustice, you are working towards his dream. We are his legacy. And if you need ways to figure it out, and I just thank you, honestly. Oh, and I have to say, happy birthday to my husband, which is today. Carrying the city of Philadelphia and the world for the past 10 months, and even today on his birthday. But thank you, everybody, and thank you for the honor. Thank you, Mayor Kenny. Thank you, everybody.
It's the honor of my lifetime to serve as your Attorney General and to work with the good women and men in our office to pursue justice every day. Dr. King, of course, said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. What we have seen over and over again, even just in the last few weeks, injustice laid bare in our communities. The COVID-19 pandemic and the attempt by some to steal this election has laid bare those inequities. Who's an essential worker and who gets to work from home? Who gets access to a vaccine and who has to wait? Who can't get a test and who is able to learn their faith? These are questions that are brought up by the presence of this pandemic day in and day out. Jim, not people that look like you and me, but others. And we have seen people step up and try and make it harder for their voices to be heard. Yet in the midst of all of those challenges, we have also seen good women and men rise up to live up to Dr. King's challenge. Dr. Stanford and the Black Doctors COVID Consortium, boy, they have stepped up to be a great equalizer, to bring fairness and justice and equity to a pandemic that is literally shattering lives. They have been difference makers. The people have stood up and said they wouldn't let anyone take away their voices in this process. Leaders like Al Schmidt and others said, we will make sure that those votes are counted and those voices will be heard. You see, in the midst of all of these challenges, in all of these inequities being laid bare, good women and men are rising up to do their part. And so I'm here today to thank Todd Bernstein, to thank everyone who has stood up to make a difference, who has stood up to bring a bit more equality to our world that is challenged right now. It's the honor of my lifetime to be your lawyer, and I look forward to continuing that work ahead with all of you, the difference makers in our community that want to live up to Dr. King's legacy. Thank you, God bless, and stay safe.
Thank you all for giving me the honor to be here. I'll just keep coming as long as you let me. We'll see how long that is. There are a couple of elected officials who are not going to speak today, but I do want to give them, not just them, but to give them a shout out, because Malcolm Kenyatta has been a voice that has been heard around this country, because Al Schmidt has been a voice that has been heard around this country. There is a value to integrity, and there is a value to stepping out of the usual roles where elected officials are assigned and sticking up for what is true and what is right. So I want to thank them for that. What is the purpose of government? Purpose of government is to protect us. It's to protect us from common threats, and those threats come in different forms. Ta-Nehisi Coates has written about what that means, and he continues to come back to the notion of protecting the human body, of protecting individuals and protecting their bodies. He talks about it in Between the World and Me. He talks about it in his articles that were in the Atlantic and were published in We Were 8 Years in Power. And as we stand here today, we see a certain pattern in American history, and we see it playing out right now. And that is a pattern of the government we give power with our vote, not protecting marginalized people. This is a familiar pattern for some of us who are old enough to remember it. I remember it distinctly from the beginning of HIV and AIDS. At the beginning of HIV and AIDS, you had two presidents, Reagan and Bush, who did not want to put a dime into research to try to find a way to deal with a different virus, HIV/AIDS. And so they were content to let gay men die, Haitians die, and hemophiliacs die. And that's who was dying at first. Needless to say, like any virus, it spread to completely different populations, because endangering anyone endangers everyone. And so we see totally different populations affected by it now. People like Dr. Alice Stanford, although it wasn't her specifically, people who stood up and resisted nonviolently in King's tradition. And I can point to 26 million African lives that are there now because of what they did. I can point to the fact that HIV medicine used to be $10,000 a head in Africa, and it's now $75. And the people who did that were not government officials, just like Dr. King was not a government official, just like the members of BCCD are not government officials, and they are to be applauded. Look at gun violence. And by the way, the NRA declared bankruptcy this week, so we're all clear. Look at that. When has this government truly protected us with reasonable regulation of guns, and how long have they been eating out of the hand of the NRA? That is a failure. It's a failure of our government to do what we give it power to do, which is to protect us. And then look at COVID-19. Who exactly is suffering the brunt of COVID-19? And we all know it's the same pattern. It's always the same pattern. The people suffering the brunt of it are people who are marginalized. They are the outsiders. They are the ones the insiders don't care so much about. Fortunately, and hopefully that will change. But it's not just going to change because of an election. It's going to change because of BCCD, because of Dr. Stanford, because of people who do God's work, who do it on the outside, who do it non-violently, who do it in the tradition of Dr. King. Those people, you people, are the answer. You're the outsiders who should be the insiders. And so I stand here as an elected official. And, the truth is elected officials on some occasions get too much credit. We get too much credit. Dr. King was unelectable in his time, make no mistake. And he was unelectable for all the right reasons. So it appears on this agenda that I'm the last elected official to have the opportunity to speak. I'm very grateful for that. But I'm even more grateful for all those of you who are not elected officials, who understand the significance of Dr. King's commitment to nonviolence, even when it was violence that took his life, of his commitment to look at the entirety of a government that failed to protect marginalized people in his time and has failed to do so in our time. Thank you all for giving me the opportunity to be here, and thank you, BCCD, for what you're doing.
We've had two triple threats, and now we're going to a quintuple threat, and then that will conclude. I didn't recognize Commissioner Schmidt, who I think, who I've always liked, but I think that for the last several months we've seen that he is a hero, really fighting the pressure of trying to overturn the election. He stood up. He is a Republican. And there's nothing wrong with that. He really stood up for what was right. I want to introduce four of our key sponsors who have been with us for many years. The first has come here from San Francisco, and I'll read in order who is going to be coming up. Dr. Pierre Theodore, who was Vice President for Medical Affairs at Johnson & Johnson Global Public Health, followed by Gregory Devins, the new President and CEO of Independence Blue Cross, Bill Goldberger, President and CEO of United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey, our friend Charmaine Matlock Turner, President and CEO of the Urban Affairs Coalition, and then finally, say the best for last, a warrior for justice, Karen Asper Jordan, who was on the front lines here in 1965 when Dr. King came to call for the turning over of the then discriminatory practices of Girard College. And Girard College now is just an incredible institution. With that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Pierre Theodore.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Pierre Theodore. I'm a surgeon and I'm a Vice President of Medical Affairs at Johnson & Johnson, our global public health group. It is truly a humbling honor to join you today. I'm here actually as just one person representing 135,000 employees of Johnson & Johnson worldwide who are dedicated to healthcare delivery, but also to healthcare equity. You know, on this day, I think we often tend to refer to some of the soaring rhetoric of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We often reference his quotes, but I often like to think of him as a master tactician, someone that truly rolled up his sleeves to get the work done. And so too are we called to, as he once said, to make a career out of humanity. The holiday of this day, and frankly, the last year in specific, calls us to a specific action. And it provides us at J&J with an opportunity to be your partners moving forward to advance projects around health equity and health justice. I'm a surgeon, as I mentioned, long ago when I was a medical student. A mentor tried to help me to choose a specialty by saying, if you become a surgeon, not only will you diagnose problems, but you'll be able to intervene. You will change them. And that is what we are called to move beyond analysis and beyond observation, but actually to begin to intervene and to fix problems. Needless to say, we find ourselves in a challenging period right now. There are a couple of forces. There's a pandemic, of course, of COVID-19, but there is also a legacy of racism and ethnic discrimination in this country. It is a centuries-old legacy, one that has been marked by a loss of educational opportunities. Why, for example, the mission of Girard College is so important. It is marked by a lack of access to even the most basic of medical care. This has placed an extraordinary cumulative burden on people of color in the United States. And that burden demands a special form of attention. On our part at Johnson & Johnson, we are developing an investigational vaccine against COVID-19, but we're also taking community health measures, such as expanding access to COVID tests. To understand this, I'd like to stress the fact that factors such as race and ethnicity really matter. And when we have a diverse group of participants in clinical trial, that gives voice to those who eventually will use towards a greater tomorrow. Of course, we find ourselves in a tumultuous period right now. And there are some echoes of a very ugly past that we see day to day in the news. We choose to focus on the partnerships that we can create, driving towards a healthcare future